title is the same, architect, but the actual role, not necessarily.
I'm Sam G, a triple registered architect who has practiced across South Africa, Australia, and the USA. This is your design passport. Real stories, practical pathways, and global design ideas to help you build a career and a life that travels with you. Ready? Let's stamp your passport.
I have a question for you. Actually, I have a lot of questions for you. But it all started because I was looking at my Podbean analytics, and I realized something that I honestly didn't expect. People are listening to your design passport from places I never imagined. And I want to know who you are. When I first started the podcast, if I'm being completely honest, I expected my main audience to come from 3 places: South Africa, Australia, and the United States. And that made sense to me. Those are the countries where I've lived and worked. Those are where I have my networks. Those are where my people are. So if people were listening, I assumed they would probably be listening from one of those places. And then I started looking at the countries showing up in Podbean, and I thought, who are you people? Because suddenly I'm seeing Singapore, Japan, Iran, Ecuador, Puerto Rico, Nepal, Uzbekistan, El Salvador, Romania, Pakistan, Panama, Morocco, Jordan, Spain. And I'm thinking, what? How did you find me? Why are you listening? What are you finding valuable? And probably most importantly, what can I learn from you? The US is still the largest percentage of downloads, at about 52.79%. But that means roughly 47% of the downloads are coming from outside of the United States. And there are currently 31 countries showing up in my analytics. Now, I know enough about analytics to know that I shouldn't make sweeping conclusions from that. I don't know exactly who is listening. I don't know why they are listening. I don't know whether someone in Japan is an architect, a student, a designer, someone considering moving to another country, someone who knows someone, or whether my analytics are somehow being completely confused by a VPN. So I'm not going to pretend I know what the numbers mean, but they do tell me something really interesting. Someone is out there, and some of you are coming back. Singapore, for example, keeps showing up, and that really caught my attention because one person listening once is interesting, but when I start seeing a country showing up again and again, I start thinking, okay, there is potentially someone, or multiple someones, over there listening to my indulgent little stories, and I want to know who you are. I think there's something I haven't really talked about enough. When I started Your Design Passport, I wanted it to become a podcast, obviously, but there was another part of it that was much more personal. I thought, if this never really makes it into the world, maybe it's just a journal, a record of my life and my adventures, a place where I could capture the things that I was experiencing and the people I was meeting and the things I was learning. And maybe one day I could go back and listen to it. Or maybe one day, when I'm not around anymore, my friends or my family could listen to it and learn a little bit more about me. That's a little self-indulgent. But honestly, I don't mind. Because I get to ask questions that genuinely interest me. I get to talk to people I'm genuinely interested in. I get to learn. And who knows what comes of that? Maybe I meet someone interesting. Maybe I make a new friend. Maybe a professional opportunity comes from it. Maybe I discover a completely different perspective on something I thought I understood. You just don't know. And that's actually part of the fun. I think I'm willing to stick it out and find out. South Africa, Australia, and the US were always going to be my first guesses. I have networks there. I've lived there. I've worked there. Those are the places where I expected people who knew me or people connected to me to be listening. But I had definitely defined my audience geographically without really realizing it. And what surprised me wasn't just that there were other countries. It was which countries? Singapore, Japan, Iran, Ecuador, Nepal, Uzbekistan, El Salvador, Romania, Pakistan, Panama, Morocco, Jordan. These aren't necessarily the countries I would have put at the top of my list and said, yes, of course, that's where my audience will be. And that's what I love about this. I don't just want to know the number. I want to put a name to the country. I want to know why you're there. Why are you listening? How you found me? What you find interesting? And what you think I should be talking about. There are a couple of countries where I actually have a bit of context. I know that at least some of the listening showing up in Oman and Eswatini may be connected to Carl and or his family. So that's a little bit of a cheat. But Japan really fascinates me. I've always loved Japanese architecture. The way the landscape and architecture are integrated, the attention to detail, the restraint, the way the building can feel like part of its environment rather than something simply placed on top of it. And I've always found the professional relationship between Japan and Australia interesting because there is reciprocity through the AACA or the AACA. So seeing Japan appear in my analytics, I love that. And then there's the fact that I'm sitting here in DFW realizing that some of the architects whose work I've studied and admired are actually represented here. The Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth by Tadao Ando, which shamefully I still haven't visited, and the Wiley Theatre, which was actually a project I researched during my thesis year. Those are the moments where architecture suddenly becomes very real. You study these buildings, you study these architects, and then one day you move somewhere and you realize, oh, I'm here, and those buildings are just around the corner. Maybe architecture really is more universal than I think it is. I've practiced architecture in 3 different countries now: South Africa, Australia, the United States. And the title is the same, architect, but the actual role, not necessarily. And that has been one of the most interesting things about moving between countries, because you realize that the profession can be recognizable without being identical.
Quick pause here. If you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to subscribe to Your Design Passport. It helps more globally minded architects find this show. And if you're considering working internationally and don't want to feel like you're starting over, I've created a free guide called the International Architect Starter Map. It walks you through the exact strategic questions you should answer before touching a single application form. You can download that in the show notes.
One of the things that really surprised me was the role of the quantity surveyor. If you're listening and you don't know what a quantity surveyor is, don't worry. Depending on where you are in the world, you may not even have one as part of your project team in the same way. In South Africa, the quantity surveyor was a really significant part of the project team. They were involved with the bill of quantities, measuring work, valuations, and payment certificates. And they were involved with the financial side of the project from much earlier in the process through construction. And honestly, sometimes I feel like the quantity surveyor was actually running the show. The architect would prepare and document the project. The quantity surveyor would be working through the quantities, costs, and commercial side. And when it came to payment certificates, the quantity surveyor's work was a major part of that process. That's not just my memory of it. The South African Association of Quantity Surveyors describes quantity surveyors as financial consultants to the construction industry who advise on costs and contractual arrangements and work with architects, engineers, and contractors. Their professional material also describes bill of quantities, measurement and valuation of work, interim payments, and final accounts as part of their profession. Then I moved to Australia, and quantity surveying was still very much a profession, but the role wasn't identical to what I had experienced in South Africa. The Australian Institute of Quantity Surveyors describes competencies including cost planning, cost estimating, quantification and measurement, tendering, contract administration, account management, and construction change management. So there's definitely similarities, but the way I experienced that role within the project team was different. And then I moved to the United States, and this is where I had to rethink the terminology altogether. Because in my experience, practicing in the US, I haven't encountered quantity surveying as the same distinct project role that I knew from South Africa and Australia. Instead, we've worked with estimators and third-party estimating services in different parts of the process. For example, before a guaranteed maximum price, or GMP, we may have a third-party estimator reviewing the contractor's numbers. And once the documents are bid or tendered, that estimator may no longer be part of the project team in the same way. So, same profession, same fundamental objective, same buildings, but a completely different ecosystem around the architect. And that really got me thinking, what else changes when you cross a border? Is it possibly our education? How does the registration process change? What's same? How does the education structure change? How is it different? How is the terminology different? What is the same? What are those things that you are just so used to that are ingrained in your everyday terminology that you just don't even think of? I've had the instance mentioned before, restrooms versus ablutions. Seems really simple when you're in it every day, but as soon as you say it out there in the big wide world in a room with different people, you kind of get that look where they cock their head to the side and they're like, I've got no idea what you said. Then we get to city ordinances, city rules, city regulations. What terminology is the same? Simple thing, setbacks versus easements versus servitudes. I mean, it's all different. Then we come to standards. What are the standards? Standards kind of a silly term because what's standard in one country might not necessarily be standard in another. Then you get construction methods. Now, this one I know is a little bit of a tricky one. Same country might have different construction methods depending on the climatic zones or whether there's earthquakes or even tornadoes. But it could also be fundamental changes in the construction methodologies from one country to another. Work culture. This is something that you don't necessarily think of, but work culture is definitely different in all three countries that I've worked in. And it can definitely impact how you feel at work and how you perceive a profession. What is the hierarchy? Are all of the different people in the firm still named the same thing? Do you have partners? Do you have principals? Do you have managing directors? These things can all be different. And then we get to the personal relationships between architects and engineers. Are we still the managing agents of all of those or principal agents? Are we the conduits for all of those consultants to move through us? What is the relationship between architects and contractors? Are you hired by the client or are you hired by the contractor? Or does that relationship change at some point within the process? And then how does the registration and examination process differ? I think the registration and examination process may actually vary more dramatically than the formal education does. That's something I'm really curious about because I can look at an architect in another country and think, we're both architects. But what did you have to do to get there? What are you legally allowed to do? What does your registration mean? What happens if you move? Can I practice there? Could you practice here? What transfers? What doesn't? And this is where it gets really interesting because for all of those differences, we're still designing buildings. We still have clients, engineers, contractors, drawings, and details. And architects everywhere can apparently become fascinated by the smallest detail. We all appreciate good design. We appreciate craftsmanship. We can all appreciate good design. I can guarantee you've been stuck in a public restroom more than once and picked out the skew grout lines and the uneven trim. We can walk into a building and notice something that most people would walk straight past. And I have to believe clients are probably similar everywhere too. They want more, they want to pay less, and they still expect the best possible quality. I don't know if that's universal, but I'm willing to investigate. One of the biggest things that I've learned is that architects are not created equal in every country. And I don't mean this in a hierarchy. I mean that the profession doesn't look exactly the same everywhere. And I've also learned that I don't know everything. I am continuously learning. They are constantly situations where I can raise my hand and say, I don't know what you mean. Or can you explain that? And honestly, that's empowering. Because when you've moved between different countries and different professional systems, you get used to the fact that there are things you won't understand immediately. You can't assume you know every acronym. You don't know every regulation or process. You don't know what every person means when they use a particular term. And that has actually made it easier for me to ask questions. And when you ask questions, you open up conversations. And when you open up conversations, you learn. That's one of the greatest gifts of moving between countries. And maybe that's actually what your design passport means to me. Your design and architecture career can become your passport into different avenues within and surrounding the architectural and design industry. Architecture can be a really strong foundation, almost a golden standard, but your career doesn't have to be one straight line. Your experience can take you into different places, different countries, different disciplines, different opportunities, different people. And then I started thinking about the actual passport metaphor. We all have our own passport. We may have the same little book, but when you open it up, it's very unlikely that two passports are the same, because every stamp represents something: a place, an adventure, a decision, a person, a career move, something you've learned, experienced, survived, or remember. And that's what our careers are like too. We all have our own collection of stamps. When I started this podcast, I thought about my own passport, my own career, adventures, and stories. But maybe your design passport isn't just my passport. Maybe yours belongs here too. Because I'm seeing downloads from 31 countries. There are people listening who have their own stories, and I want to hear them. If you're listening to your design passport from somewhere I've never been, I want to know who you are. Where are you listening from? Why are you listening to your design passport? And what does architecture or design actually look like where you live? What can you teach me? What can you tell me about your profession that I might not understand from sitting here in Dallas? Maybe you're an architect, a student, or a designer. Maybe you're nowhere near the profession at all. That's okay too. I want anyone and everyone to be able to find something valuable here. Maybe it's a career lesson, maybe it's a professional insight, maybe it's a story, or maybe you just find my stories interesting. I'll take it. If you want to get more specific, tell me. How do you become an architect where you live? What does registration look like? What does architectural education look like? How does construction work? How does the architect work with engineers? What does the architect actually do? What does a typical project look like? What's different? What's exactly the same? And here's another one I'm genuinely curious about. Can you imagine practicing somewhere else? Would you? Could you? What would transfer? What wouldn't? And perhaps the question I'm most interested in, would you have followed the same career path if you'd been born somewhere else? Maybe there are people listening who are thinking about moving countries. Maybe you're thinking about studying somewhere else. Maybe you're thinking about registration in another country, or wondering whether your experience translates. Or maybe you're just fascinated by how other people practice. And maybe, if enough of us start talking to one another, we can understand our profession a little better. Because I don't think architecture gets better in isolation. I think we need a collective appreciation for the profession, for the people doing the work, teaching it, studying it, building it, and the people trying to figure out what they want their careers to look like. And I'll be honest about something else. I would love to meet you. That's part of why I'm doing this. I don't know what happens when you start talking to people around the world. Maybe nothing. Maybe you have really interesting conversations. Maybe you become friends. Maybe you end up on the podcast. Maybe I end up visiting your country. Maybe we work together someday. Maybe you introduce me to someone else. You just don't know. And that's the point. Although, I do have one question. If I'm seeing 31 countries in Podbean, how many of you are actually in those countries? And how many of you are sitting somewhere with your VPN turned on? Because that could completely blow up my beautiful international architecture research project. So if I'm wrong, tell me. So here's my invitation. If you're listening from somewhere I've never been, send a message. Tell me who you are, why you're listening, and what should I know about architecture or design where you live. I want to hear your stories. I want to understand what's different. I want to find out what's the same. And I want to know what I can learn from you, because I have a feeling that we have far more in common than what first meets the eye, and I want to find out what those things are. I started Your Design Passport thinking about my own journey, my own career, adventures, and stories. And maybe there was a little bit of self-indulgence in that. But somewhere along the way, you started listening. And now I'm looking at this map thinking, who are you? And I really mean that as an invitation. Tell me, because this passport apparently has a lot more stamps to collect.
Thank you for joining me on Your Design Passport. My hope is that every episode gives you the clarity, courage, and confidence to build a global design life that feels aligned with who you are, wherever you are. If today's conversation resonated with you, hit follow, share it with a friend, or leave a review so that more global dreamers can find this work. Until next time, keep exploring, keep expanding, and remember, your next chapter is already unfolding.